very quickly about Rainbow Madness. This is just going to be a roundup of some ridiculous stories regarding the Rainbow Mafia that came out recently. Just a reminder of the clown world that we live in. Before I go any further, check out a recent live hangout that Carl and Callum did, talking about the grooming gangs and going through the actual timeline of the grooming gangs. So obviously a lot of what we get about the grooming gangs and what a lot of you may have had access to is very fractured. Headlines here and there, news reports here and there. This is going through a comprehensive timeline of when they started, what was going on, how they happened, when it first came out that it was a scandal, that the police had been covering it up, all of that information. So for £5 a month, you can access that and everything else that we have on the website. So please do so. So Connor did this big interview last week that he covered on a segment where he spoke on GB News to he mistakenly put it down as Naked Attraction, but I don't know what's going on with the edit button on Twitter, so I can understand that he made the mistake. It was Naked Education participant Liam Halewood, where he debated the fact that he'd gone on to this Channel 4 television program, once again, Channel 4, very subversive channel, and stripped off in front of a bunch of children, and Liam Halewood was basically saying, they do it in the schools anyway, yada, 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 they get all of this information, this is just meaning that somebody actually gets to do it in front of them, which is weird enough in the first place, because it's one thing having it be on a diagram or a screen, there's another person stripping off in front of the children, because I think that adds an entirely new dynamic to it, and also I'm not entirely happy with what most of these kids are being taught in schools in the first place. But Connor had the debate with them, he covered that, he mentioned as part of that, this opens up a massive gateway for actual paedophiles to be able to basically exhibit themselves in front of children. If we go to the next link, he found this one. It's translated from Dutch, but basically the headline was, participant in the children's program Ultra throws away the clothes is convicted of assaulting a child, and the Dutch television channel that did this removed that particular episode of the program. So this is just where a paedophile was able to sneak in and strip off in front of a bunch of children for his own jollies. So that's fun. Connor mentioned that. If you go to the actual website page for Naked Education, it says their aims, it's all about body positivity. Anna Richardson, Yinky Bikini, and Dr. Alex George go on a mission to normalise all body types, champion our differences, and break down stereotypes. None of these inherently are good things. And the excuse that I constantly see, I'm sorry for the fact that you're having to see arses on screen, by the way, for this, but none of these are inherently good things. And the excuse that we always see is, well, Instagram damaged a generation of girls. I know Instagram damaged a generation of girls, and young men as well. Unrealistic body types, whether it be too skinny, all these filters, etc., they're very damaging for young people who don't get a realistic understanding of what a beautiful person looks like, or an accurate indication of what these people look like in real life. But it's entirely the opposite. That doesn't mean we have to swing the pendulum all the other way around.
Yeah.
And I would argue it is explicitly subversive and undermines traditional beauty standards and body norms, and actively promotes unhealthy lifestyle, to then turn around and go, if you're a big fat blob, that's absolutely fine by me. And just following up on that, the man himself, Liam Halewood, did this interview, and you might notice there's a bit of a difference. He did an interview with Talk TV as opposed to the one on GB News. He probably thought that the GB News audience wouldn't have been as happy with him doing this, but Talk TV were perfectly happy with him to do it. So this is Liam Halewood doing an interview.
Did he lose on a strip poker?
Perhaps before they went live on air, he just lost a few hands, and that was what happened. No, of course that's not what happened. He decided he was going to come on here, and Talk TV, who are open to free discussion and free expression, decided it was perfectly okay for him to conduct the interview, presumably naked. He might be wearing socks, I'm not entirely sure, but for all intents and purposes, as far as I can see here, he's naked, and I am subjecting all of you to this video clip as well, because I had to see it as well. I'm not going to play anything off it, because the main important thing that he says isn't noted in the actual description on the tweet itself, where he explains after the Channel 4 show Naked Education received 1,000 complaints showing adults stripping for children, he explained why he did it. Going on this show made me feel liberated. Made you feel liberated. Oh, so it's not for the children. It's not for the benefit of the education of the children then. It was for the benefit of your self-esteem. Okay. I don't care if this is a crime or not. Straight to jail. straight to prison, as far as I'm concerned. I'm sorry. It's not, sex education is not for the benefit of the people participating in the education to feel liberated in stripping off of children in front of children. It's not for the purpose of exhibitionism. It should, for as far as I'm concerned, be for the benefit of making sure that children are able to make intelligent decisions when they're in a sexual situation and know what to do and what not to do, and maybe even be under the right frame of mind to be able to say no if they don't want to have sex. Because that's the thing that none of this even considers, which is the idea that a child or a teenager or young adult might not want to have sex. Maybe they don't feel ready, maybe they don't feel it's the right person. Obviously, they always talk about consent, but it's never never from the frame of mind of you're not ready. It's from the perspective of you just don't want to do it with this person. We know just take it for granted that obviously all teenagers just constantly want to be having sex and going at it like rabbits constantly. But no, it's not always the case. There might be some people who are just like, I'm not ready yet. And this guy just decides that he wants to go and strip off in front of kids and then subject all of us to it.
You know what I find really repulsive here? Because Connor presented this also on Friday, and I was with him, and I was furious with what I was watching. It seems to me that we never know what people have in their minds, and it's a dark place, and all we have is signs. So whenever we see repeated signs of, let's say, weird behavior by some people, we start being, let's say, somehow a bit apprehensive and careful.
We're put off just a little bit by it.
Yes. So the thing is that we see, all these behaviors, and we say something is really going on here. For some reason, right now it is portrayed as sort of racist or whatever,
sexist, homophobic.
Yeah, homophobic, whatever phobic. If you just say no, I don't like this, I think that's a bad sign. That's a weird sign of behavior. I want to be careful.
Yeah, our society has been completely gaslit to distrust its own gut instincts.
Yes, and that's a problem with a sort of egalitarianism that tries to level down everyone, morally speaking.
Well, we certainly live in radical egalitarianism.
Yeah, it tries to boil down everyone, so it creates a mess. Let's say that there is no distinction between morality and immorality anymore in that society.
Yeah.
We can't detect those signs as well as we could before.
And you mentioned all of the signs. Well, there's plenty of signs going on constantly all around us. And there are the three articles that I wanted to highlight here that show just all of the nonsense that's constantly going on around the Rainbow Mafia. And this is the first one, which is the former Planned Parenthood director. Now, Planned Parenthood isn't necessarily directly adjacent to the LGBT movement, but they absolutely are. They say all of the taglines, they show all of the affirmations of faith to the queer movement, etc., etc. So it's close enough as far as I'm concerned, and also Planned Parenthood facilitates a lot of the hedonistic, degenerate behaviours that we see cursing humanity and the West right now. So this one is interesting because the former Planned Parenthood director committed suicide days after his apartment was raided by police in a child pornography investigation. Now, the police did a terrible job here, because they didn't just raid his apartment, they raided the wrong apartment. Let's go through this. So the Office of the Chief State Medical Examiner confirmed that 35-year-old Tim Yergau had died as the result of suicide on Tuesday. Yergau had previously worked as the Director of Strategic Communications for the Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. Police botched the raid at Yergau's apartment on April 6th when they accidentally went to the wrong residence and broke down the door to his neighbour's unit. The neighbour, Stacey Wentzner, said that they raided her apartment and placed her in handcuffs before realising they were at the wrong apartment. Brilliant. Genius move. 5 days after the botched raid, Yergau was found dead in his apartment. So they gave him the opportunity to basically remove himself from the equation. So, who knows if he was implicated in all of this. I mean, suicide to me doesn't scream innocent in this situation. So without trying to defame the dead, which I don't think you actually can do, to be fair, I'm going to say he probably was guilty of being involved in some kind of child pornography ring, and they gave him the opportunity to remove himself from the equation before he could maybe give other names that were involved in this. So that's absolutely ridiculous. Yergau had a large social media imprint and left behind many posts on his Instagram account devoted to liberal causes, including the LGBT movement. unsurprisingly. In the next one, we've got this ridiculous woman who is who I think I may have covered before, a Sid Gallagher. Have you heard of this person?
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry to expose you to this. Who promoted a eunuch gender identity for kids. Eunuch.
Sorry, what does this have to do with it?
What does this have to do with what? We live in clown world.
Whatever.
It all comes into the black hole that is clown world eventually. Everything. No longer do we have to have the idea or the excuse, you could say, of, I'm trapped in the wrong body. You just look down and you go, don't fancy them anymore. Pop them off, please.
Wasn't gender supposed to be different from
sexual
genitals for that camp?
Well, not for the eunuch gender identity, evidently. So she released a video where she said, let me see here, she explained that a eunuch is somebody who is assigned male at birth, but may not be comfortable with masculine features. Now, from my understanding, those are just called femboys. But this is apparently a completely different thing. So Gallagher classifies eunuchs as gender-diverse individuals and explains to her young viewers that there is an entire chapter devoted to people who identify as eunuch in the most recent standards of care released by the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. Yes, this is a real organisation. Yes, they probably have a certain level of influence on medical practices in America and elsewhere across the world. Yes, they have an entire chapter dedicated to eunuch gender identity. WPATH's decision to include eunuch in its Standards of Care 08 was met with intense criticism. The chapter defines eunuch as the oldest recognised gender outside the... the oldest recognised gender outside the binary, and even goes so far as to claim that children can identify as eunuch. I heard someone laughing in the background there. Like other gender-diverse individuals, eunuch individuals may be aware of their identity in childhood or adolescence. So once again, just immediately taking any child at their word, knowing what they're talking about. Absolutely ridiculous. Due to the lack of research, this has got to be a joke. I feel like I'm being memed on even covering this. Due to the lack of research into the treatment of children who may identify as eunuchs, we refrain from making special suggestions. While there is a 4,000-year history of eunuchs in society, all by choice, I'm sure. Every single one of them asked for this surgery. I just need to be affirmed. Please, Mr. Torturer, affirm my identity, please. The greatest wealth of information about contemporary eunuch-identified people is found within the large online peer support community that congregates on sites such as the Eunuch Archive, which was established in 1998. And the chapter provides a hyperlink to the Eunuch Archive, which contains child castration pornography. Child castration pornography. Interesting hyperlink, although I will say I do know some men going out with very strict women who might as well identify as eunuchs, so perhaps I can refer them to this sexual care. So that was reported on by Redux, that if you actually go on that website, that you can find some very questionable imagery. And then the group beyond WPATH formed shortly after the release of this particular handbook that they did, which included the eunuch chapter. When Sweden broke ranks with the organisation last year, paediatrician Matt Reimer stated that the decision to include eunuch as an innate gender identity even children can possess was a sign that the organisation was no longer a scientific organisation, but instead an activist group. So this was what did it for you. This is the thing that really tips you off that you're working with activists and not medical professionals. This was the first indication that you ever had. So on your dichotomy of signs, the signs that we're allowed to recognise and ignore, everything up to but not including eunuch is absolutely fine. And then as soon as you go, maybe we should just castrate the kids, that's where you draw the line. That's the sign that we're allowed to recognise. All right, so if naked education starts talking to these kids of, have you ever wanted to have your bollocks chopped off? That's when we're allowed to start noticing. I'm glad that we finally found this out. The eunuch session... At the 2022 WPATH conference offered a glimpse of the type of person that Gallagher has chosen to advertise her services to. Johnson's co-presenter, Dr. Michael Erwig, told the story of the first eunuch patient he ever treated. A 19-year-old who was living in his parents' basement playing video games. He wasn't working, he was spending all of his time online, and may have been on the autism Asperger's spectrum. This is the sort of person I think it's completely there's no medical difficulties with chopping this man's bollocks off, obviously. Erwig observed the young man wanted to be prepubertal. I don't know if he got this testimony from himself or if he just decided this man wants to have no testicles. He wanted a low testosterone level. It sounds like he already had one. And so despite not identifying as eunuch, Erwig decided that deduced that he fell into that population. Very interesting.
Deduced. Yeah.
Very interesting. Elementary, my dear Watson.
I have ascertained.
I have ascertained. If you look at the man's posture and stature, you see the Pepe memes that he is putting out at a record rate. He is obviously a eunuch. And then the last article that I just wanted to cover because it is absolutely ridiculous. How gay men saved us from monkeypox. Were you at risk of monkeypox? I don't think you were. And neither was I. But let's read through anyway.
But why?
But why? Well,
maybe we need to check our historical privilege.
Maybe. Or maybe it's just because I don't like taking it up the bum. But that's a subject for another time. It was July of 2022, last summer, and an outbreak of Mpox, formerly known as Monkeypox, because presumably Monkeypox was far too racist a name for it, was in full swing. From a handful of cases in a few cities in early May, the outbreak surged to more than 16,000 cases in 75 countries and territories just 2 months later. It was terrifying. In the early May of 2022, it found its way to gay raves in Spain and Belgium. Huge annual parties that drew men from all over the world. Clothing was scant, grinding was plentiful, and when the parties were over, everyone flew home and presumably gave it to their boyfriends. Within weeks, Mpox cases resulting from human-to-human transmission began cropping up in cities worldwide. The outbreak became an epidemic, perhaps even a pandemic?
You do the Dr. Evil thing.
Luckily, we were wrong. While Mpox could live on surfaces, it turned out not to spread that way. The virus required close, sustained contact to spread, which is why it was fanning out overwhelmingly through sex. So this outbreak started in gay and bisexual communities and mostly stayed in these communities. But not for long. Oh, sorry, carry on.
Is it a phobic article?
No, this is very much an affirming article. So we don't need to worry. There's no homophobia coming from this article. They're just saying the quiet part out loud, which is, yes, gay men can never control themselves from having a ridiculous amount of sex with other gay men, even when their own personal health might be at risk. If AIDS couldn't stop them, if you remember when this story first came out, it's just funny that this is coming back and defending it and saying that apparently we were saved from this outbreak as well. If you remember when it came out, the whole argument that I heard was, well, AIDS didn't stop gay men from having ridiculous amounts of promiscuous sex, so monkeypox won't either. Brilliant logic. Gay men with Mpox were turned away from urgent care clinics and emergency rooms. Phlebotomists refused to draw their blood. Like its predecessors, COVID-19 and HIV, Mpox had all the markings of a public health disaster. It took nearly 2 months into the outbreak for testing to become widely available. A dearth of vaccines created Hunger Games-like scenarios in cities throughout the country, with vaccine clinics opening and then shutting their doors for lack of supply. Cases began to appear in a small handful of transgender people and cisgender women and children, raising alarm about wider spread. Wait, children? I thought you said that it was only prolonged contact, mostly involving sex. I can understand.
That sounds suspicious.
I can understand how transgender people and some women, you know, if it's a bisexual guy who caught it on the weekend and then has sex with a woman, maybe. But why children? I'll just leave that hanging in the air. Very interesting. But while health officials and journalists hesitated, gay and bi men sprang into action. Young men with lesions covering their faces took to social and mainstream media, telling the public that they were dealing with the worst pain I've ever experienced in my life, and perhaps the most telling, I would rather have COVID. That's right, I would rather have the sniffles than having these incredibly painful pox all over my face. Difficult choice. Benjamin Ryan, a gay journalist, and Carlton Thomas, a gay doctor, risked cancellation, e.g. being yelled at on Twitter, to dish out what Dr. Thomas referred to as tough love advice for their community. Slam the brakes on sex outside of committed relationships, seek immediate medical care for symptoms, and get vaccinated as soon as possible. And the gay community listened. So the brave message that was being spread was gay men, please stop being hoes. Stop being a hoe, keep it in your pants for 5 minutes and get vaccinated, and then return to being a hoe.
That was the tough love advice.
That was the tough love message. Yes, that was very brave to say. Communications teams at the CDC made great strides during this time. They acknowledged the realities of gay sexuality and its breadth of expression, using the actual language that gay men use when discussing sex with each other. The words fetish gear appeared on a CDC website for the first time. The clinical term anus became the more user-friendly butthole. And instead of public sex environments, the CDC spoke frankly about back rooms and sex parties and the risk of contracting Mpox in these spaces. Now, I used to remember being told that, gay people, they just keep it in their bedrooms. They're just like you and me. They have all of these relationships that are perfectly wholesome and well committed. Now, and I know people who are like that. I know plenty of gay people who are just normal people. But the wider gay culture, the more I learn about it, the more I am honestly disgusted, and I can't deny it. I cannot deny it because this is incredibly degenerate stuff which is coming to light that I think a lot of us weren't aware of before all of a sudden this became accepted and normalised in wider society. So while an early and frankly honest public health response could have blunted the outbreak, resulting in far fewer cases and far less suffering, the swift collective action of gay and bi men prevented catastrophe. Now,
How? I just don't see how.
But where in this equation, I need to ask you after I've read this article, where in this equation have you or I been saved from monkeypox? Because it seems to me that it was just gay guys
I think,
and a few stray children for some reason.
I think that they have in mind that no one is
truly straight.
100% straight. That's what the author of the article may have
the author's just there like, well, who hasn't sucked a cock here or there? Come on, that's the maybe this. I mean, it's the New York Times, and I know that New York is a very metropolitan and accepting city. So
it's like Tropic Thunder, where you have Robert Downey Jr.'s character telling to other, it's Hollywood. Everyone's gay once in a while.
That might be true, but yeah, I just thought I'd go through a few of these ridiculous stories that come out in the news every so often, just to remind everybody that the Rainbow Coalition is completely mad, and we exist constantly in the deluge of clown world.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the premium podcast, this episode on Is Jesus Christ a Socialist? If you'd like to find out what else has been put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.